WSKY SkyRock Talk Radio, where the rock don't stop. A-Town, we're on the air. Welcome. I'm the voice behind the rock, your host, rocking at the speed of light, rocking, rock, the living legend, the man of the hour, the man with the power, the hit maker, the record breaker, the man with style and grace, a pretty face who will make your back crack and your liver quiver, who's dined with kings and queens and slept in alleys and ate pork and beans, high ride, smoke, blowing, flying higher than a jet plane, 3-season podcaster, baby, when the others are smiling and joking, Rockin Rog is cooking and smoking like no one can right here on WSKY SkyRock Talk Radio. So lock it in and rip the knob off of it. It's a new day, a new us, and rise to break new ground with new ideas, new success, and new ways of doing things. Take up the challenge and get the new skills on board. We can only win when we try again. Welcome to the place for perseverance, passion, purpose, struggles and breakthroughs, friendships and new beginnings, the place that changes the way you live. We're diving deep into setbacks that will really set us for major success stories, and we are meeting some incredible, amazing people just like you and just like me, but they've done a few things differently and a few things longer, and that's what's made them amazing. Let's remind ourselves every day we're only one small decision away from our next success story. This is Season 3, Episode 4. Thank you for joining us, giving us feedback, words of encouragement. Please take a moment and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can hear us also on all podcast platforms: Spotify for podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Samsung Podcasts, Amazon Alexa, Amazon Music, Chromecast Player, web browser, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Thank you. Like us, subscribe, share, be a blessing to someone else. We're in this all together. We're coming together to build the strongest rockin', reaching our community, our city, our country with kindness movement, social media in your area. This area has ever seen, because the more we share our story, your story, the more lives we can change. So thank you for joining this movement. Thank you for joining our Facebook group, WSKY SkyRock Talk Radio. Hit us up on our website, skyrocktalkradio.com. And thank you once again for listening. Show some love. Click on the merch link on our website and order yourself a free SkyRock t-shirt. Email us your name, address, size, color you would love for your t-shirt. And show me some love also by clicking on the support link on the website, because every dollar counts towards spreading kindness.
Thank you for listening all around the world. United States, France, United Kingdom, Brazil, Burkina Faso, Algeria, Morocco, Senegal, Switzerland, Belgium, Italy, Congo, Canada, Laos, Poland, Ivory Coast, Luxembourg, Tunisia, Romania, Gambia, Cameroon, Chad, Singapore, Bulgaria, Trinidad and Tobago, Ethiopia, and Czech Republic.
Let the past pass, or sooner than later, we might pass on with the past. When Lot's wife looked back, she became a pillar of salt, which could not be used as seasoning. Truth is, she lost her value. Yesterday is gone forever. Today is what we have. Tomorrow will be better or bitter, depending. Yes, depending on what we make today. Let's decide to make a better decision for the better. The past belongs to the past. Whatever the mistakes, undesirable successes, never achieved does not matter. God has gifted us with a lot of skills, a lot of knowledge, and the power of wisdom. Use the same to break the record of time. Take some risk and empower the brain to work even on overtime. Yesterday does not matter. Our present is what we are now considering. We have a long way to go and a better future ahead. We can make it and become whom God says we can be. Greatness starts with the imagination, how we use our time, and the kind of people we associate with. By the end of this year, we will see wonders. We will achieve dreams. And we will break the records of life with success. Never give up. Keep moving. It is time to make a move. Endeavor to make our life matter. And above all, trust in God. Love and kindness to you. Be kind and love always, person to person, one kindness at a time. And let's reach our community, our city, and our country with kindness. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest this week, her son was injured in an automobile accident in 2008 and sustained a traumatic brain injury. Now, before the accident, he was attending college and studying to be a band director. He was one semester away from graduation when the accident occurred here in Natchitoches Parish on Louisiana Highway 174 at the I-49 exit ramp. There was a driver of a Toyota that failed to yield when exiting I-49 and was struck by a Chevy pickup driven by 22-year-old Stephen McCradle, who was taken to Natchitoches Regional Hospital, and his passenger was the son of our guest, 24-year-old Chris Hampton, who was taken to LSU Hospital in Shreveport with serious injuries. Now, today, our guest is the author of daily devotions for caregivers, Keeping Up with Chris Hampton, Dove's Fire Ministries publications. She has written Bible study guides, devotionals. She has a YouTube morning channel called Peace Out. Please take a moment and help me welcome Jeanie Olinger to WSKY SkyRock Talk Radio. Thank you, Jeanie, for taking the time to speak and share with us.
Well, thank you so much for the invite, and that's the story. I guess that's it, right?
that's a short summary, isn't it?
Yes, it's a very short, condensed version.
What I want to do is I want to read a couple of posts that you have shared, and then give you an opportunity to take us back. As I'm reading this, take a moment and reflect, because a lot of times just listening back to what you've written will take you back to that moment of you writing it, and then share with us all the way back to 2008, and then share exactly what happened specifically. You written, November the 8th will never be the same for me. It was a day that affected many people. For me, I got the phone call that is a parent's worst nightmare. I was in Chicago living a wonderful adventure and was harshly jerked out of life as I knew it. Not only did I lose my son on this day, I lost the freedom of life. Today, I rejoice that he continues to get better each day, but I miss him more than words can say. I live a living grief, losing my son, but he is technically still here. Needless to say, everything about my life has changed, and I have changed. I'm thankful for the few friends who have been willing to continue this painful walk with me. Life has few true friends who are willing to continue the walk when life gets ugly. I'm thankful that my view of faith in church has changed. It's an ongoing process with wounds that never quite heal. While I sat in the ICU waiting room for 3 weeks, I kept thinking that God was going to ride in on a white horse and save me. He did not. I no longer wait for him to come in and fix the situation. I just focus on his sustaining power and faithfulness to carry me through. My faith has no doubt been shaken, but I can still sing the words to this and many other songs. When peace like a river attendeth my soul, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. I have great peace in knowing that it is also well with Chris's soul. His body may not be functioning like it should be, but there was no damage to his spirit, the part of us that God keeps. So we will just continue trusting the one who keeps us, no matter how painful the journey. Parents, hug your children one extra time today. Take time to talk with them and listen to them. You never know what a day can bring. Jeanie, take us back. You were in Chicago. That's about 850 miles away. That's 12 and a half hours. And your son is here in Louisiana. How did you get back? Did you take a plane? Did you drive?
I did. No, when I got there, I was actually working 3 jobs in Chicago and planning a trip to Africa. I was finally going to fulfill my life's dream and go to Africa and work in a Bible college. I was working 3 jobs, and one of those 3 jobs was TJ Maxx. I worked early in the morning and went in and cleaned. Didn't really do the janitorial stuff, but I got the store prepped and ready. I cleaned the break room. I had all these different tasks I had to do. So I went in early in the morning that Saturday. That was actually on a Saturday, and I was in and I was just working away. I'd been there about an hour and a half, and my daughter called, and I knew it was her, but I couldn't understand a word she was saying. I understood something about a meta-flight, maybe a wreck, and I was like, "What are you? Stop!" She was crying just hysterically, and then I thought she was saying "Mama," and I was like, "Well, I'm Mama, so I know she's not talking about me." So I'm like, "What? I don't understand what you're saying." And so she gathered herself a second, and she said, "Bubba has been in a wreck, and they meta-flighted him from the wreck to Shreveport." And I said, "I'm on my way." Well, I immediately. I know it sounds like the movies and it sounds like what everybody says, but my blood ran cold and my feet went out from under me and I landed on my knees there in that break room. And I'm sure I was white as a sheet. And so I called my friend, Mary, who lives in Indianapolis, and I said, "Pray, Chris has been in a wreck." I had no idea how bad it was, but I knew being meta-flighted from a wreck scene was not a good sign, right? And so I gathered myself. I went to another coworker, and I don't know why I remember this so vividly, but she had a daughter who had a wreck in Florida, and she couldn't get to her because it was in the middle of winter, and in Chicago, you don't go anywhere sometimes in the winter. So I went to her, and I said, "My son was just in a wreck. Please pray." And she said I did, and I'm assuming I clocked out. I know I drove back to the house where I was staying with the friends, and I was trying to buy a ticket, but I didn't even have any money. So I don't know what I thought I was doing because I literally didn't have the money for a ticket, but I was looking for tickets to fly to Shreveport. And finally, the people I was staying with, he came and he goes, "Go pack, I'll get your ticket." And I was like, "Well, I don't even know what to pack." And I said, "I guess I'll pack for, I don't know. I was going to buy a round trip ticket." And they were like, "You don't know when you're coming back." And they could understand the serious, how serious this was. And I was more in shock. And so finally I grabbed my bag I had actually used for ministry all those years. I had my laptop, my Bible, my journal, an extra pair of underwear, and I think an extra pair of earrings or something, and just headed to, I went to the airport at O'Hare, flew out of O'Hare. I vaguely remember going to another airport, and then I didn't get in Shreveport until about 7 o'clock that night. It took all day to get there. It was the longest day of my life, and in between were all these phone calls. I finally got someone that said he had a brain injury. I didn't even necessarily know what that meant, how bad that was, and finally the chaplain told me they were waiting to see if they had to remove part of his skull and things like that. And you couldn't get any information. It was almost just made a bad situation worse because they wouldn't talk to me over the phone. And I'm like, "But I'm his mom." So it took all day. It was a very long day. I used to go back and read my journal entries on those days, the things I wrote on the plane and things like that. Just everything is on hold. You can't think past this moment. And all I could think of was get to him. I actually called Apostle Tisdale from there because I had just moved to Chicago from Louisiana a few months before. And I had him be my hands and eyes there, and he finally was able to call me and tell me a few things of what was going on, which still didn't make a lot of sense. And then finally, as those things began to unfold, he had the traumatic brain injury. He also had a broken neck that was, had it been just a millimeter one way or the other, it would have paralyzed him, which would have totally changed our story. They said if he was up and around, they would put the big halo on him. But since they knew he wasn't going to be up and around and he was going to be in the hospital for, well, we didn't know, but over 4 months at that time, they just put the real large collar on him because he wasn't going to be getting up and around and doing much. And so that was the beginning. That was just the beginning. He was in ICU for 3.5 weeks. Then they moved him up to the 8th floor, which was very good, but he had contacted MRSA while he was there, so we had to be in isolation. Family came to help. When I got there the night of the wreck, though, the waiting room was full. It was full of all of his college buddies and his instructors. Everybody had dropped what they were doing, and they were waiting for me to get there so they could hug me and tell me they were with me and things like that. Now, his dad was there, and my daughter was there also, but the waiting room was full. I bet there was probably 50 people there. And I remember that support of, these are his friends, so that initial 3.5 weeks where he didn't even open an eye until day 21 before he ever even opened an eye, and he just cracked it open then. But those people were in and out, and I got to know his buddies, and I got to know some stories about him that he probably didn't want me to know. And I would tell him, hey, I'm still the mom, wait. And but I learned so much about him in that 3 weeks and his friends, and I thought, if he's running with these people, my son was a good man. So, I mean, I had an idea he was anyway, but he was running with some top-notch people who fed us, brought cots so we could sleep, just took care of us for that first week. They were just there 24/7. There was always somebody there. And we camped out there for 4 months. Then we went to a nursing home for about 6 months. Then we went to New Orleans, to Touro, which is the premier brain injury place. But he did not respond. And it was at that point that I didn't want to go back to living with in a nursing home with him, because they just put me up too, which was way above and beyond. It's a whole story in itself too. And then that's when I decided, though, in September, right at almost the year mark of the wreck, but in September, we went ahead. My sister and brother-in-law came down and helped me moving back to Oklahoma so that I could be near family, because by then I was realizing this is the long haul. We're not going to just be okay. There's not a button to push to just make this all go away. This is going to be a long, drawn-out process. And it has been. It still is. but it's good. It's good.
Do you know about the driver? How did he turn out?
Yes. Stephen was actually okay. Stephen didn't see the truck coming and pulled out in front of him. It T-boned on Christopher's side of the car. And Chris yelled stop, and Stephen turned to look and actually saw the truck hit Chris in the head. Literally saw that. So he's still I haven't talked to him in a long time now, but he was having a lot of post-traumatic stress and lots of depression because he fixed something he couldn't break. But he was actually transported by ambulance to a local hospital there along I-49 somewhere. And then later they discovered that he actually had broken a rib and punctured a lung. So they meta-flighted him to LSU. And so after he was still in ICU, Chris was still in ICU, and they brought Stephen down to see Chris. And that was a very overwhelming moment. His parents, and there I was, and they wheeled Stephen in, and Stephen just lost it when he saw Chris. And I mean, Chris looks normal, except he had all these tubes going everywhere, and the machines were on him and all of that. And I remember going over to his mom and just hugging her and saying, I got the same phone call you got. And just having some compassion for her. Now, Stephen was able to go on back home, and he actually was able to go back and finish the semester. They were both going to Northwestern. They were both on the drumline. Now, Chris was not in school that semester. He had taken that semester off and was going to do his student teaching in the spring. So he actually wasn't in school at that time, but Stephen wasn't. Stephen was able to finish that semester, and then he went ahead and graduated on time and all of that, and went on to do all the things these guys talked about and wanted to do, play the drums and teach drums and band other instruments to students and things like that.
It's wonderful.
So he ended up being okay.
You mentioned in your post, life has few true friends who are willing to continue the walk when life gets ugly. I'm thankful that my view of faith and church has changed. What does that mean?
There's a lot in that.
Yes.
It's not, there's a lot of emotional stuff to deal with when you go through something like this. And it's always somebody else. It's not you. So it's easy to offer advice or it's easy to console or counsel. But when you look up and you realize nobody's really standing with you, this probably would have, I probably wrote that post. I don't know what the date is on that one in particular, but I probably wrote it maybe even a year or 2 years in, because that's when I kind of looked up and thought, my world has changed. Yeah. There's, my friends aren't my friends. Nobody comes over anymore. They kind of, that initial few months when it's fresh and it's, oh my goodness, and they're processing their loss too, then they're there. And then once they figure out, oh, this is just your new norm, it's not on purpose, but you just kind of stop. They stop helping, they stop calling, they stop coming. And so I found myself feeling like I was abandoned. And then I had a guy, when I actually, like I said, lived in the nursing home with Christopher there in a nursing home in Bernice, Louisiana. We were there around 6 months. And I literally lived there with him. I didn't have anywhere to go. I'd gotten rid of all of my things. I had come down from Chicago. I couldn't just take him home. And I wasn't capable of that anyway at that time. But I had a church that came and they said, what can we do for you? And I'm sure they thought I was going to want money. And I said, I just need fellowship. I miss fellowship. And he was like, oh, okay. And I never saw him again. And so it was, it was just amazing that I was like, that's a simple request. I wasn't asking for $1 million. I didn't ask you to raise my son up and pray over the healing prayer even. I just asked for fellowship. And it was just that feeling of, I am alone. Now, I had friends, I had friends who came to see us there in Bernice especially. I still am in contact with friends, but to have someone close, it was like it felt like everybody had left, even though they didn't technically leave me. And so you're left standing there and you realize all of a sudden this fight is just you and God, and what are you going to get out of this? And so I had to go through a time of having my faith redefined in a way, because I was raised that if something bad happened to you, it's because you didn't have faith. And if something bad happened to you, it was indirectly, it wasn't on purpose. But if you were, if something bad happened and you couldn't pray it out, confess it out, believe it out, then there's something wrong with your faith. And so I was in quite the dilemma there, trying to figure out, what do I do with this? And because it doesn't match my own theology, it doesn't match what I believe. And so I had to take the time to just go back into the Word and find myself, just go back up to God. Now, I've learned really quickly that God's okay when I'm mad at Him. And I began to find Psalms like Psalm 13, where David says, how long are you going to look the other way, God? Do you not see this pain in my heart? Do you not see this grief? And yet you're looking the other way. Are you going to hear me? And I was like, oh, that's in the Bible? David felt that, and that God let him put it in the Bible. I read scriptures and Psalms there where he said things like, I cried all night. My tears have soaked my bed. I cry in despair. And I was like, you can say that? And I began to realize I could go to God and tell Him exactly how I felt. And He didn't say, get out of here till you get some faith. He didn't condemn me. Actually, He gently led me just deeper into His heart. And I began to redefine my faith, not as something that is a magic button that you push to avoid situations or get out of situations fast, but faith is that sustaining force that carries you right through them. And all of our Bible heroes are our Bible heroes because of what they faced, not because of what they were able to avoid through faith.
Yeah. Let me read one more post that you've written. It says, 10 years ago today, I brought Chris home. I was terrified but determined to try. There have been lots of ups and downs, struggles, victories, defeats, sighs and tears, along with some joys and laughs. It certainly has not been easy. Each day is its own journey to fight through many prayers and hope. Some days I win, some days I lose. I'm amazed at all he can do now, but still grieve over who he was. My faith has been redefined. I've changed a lot, yes, yet I'm still me, still determined, and we are embarking on new journeys soon to be born. I'm so thankful for all who have helped me along the way and for those who continue to help. Thank you to those who continue to follow his progress and the few who actually still talk to me now and then. LOL. I consider it a gift to be able to care for him. I don't take it for granted, and there are many players who help make it happen. I can't wait to see what this journey brings up next. I soon found that faith didn't mean I wouldn't have to go through the fire, swim a raging river, or climb the rocky cliffs in life. Instead, I realized that God was there in every situation to be that anchor of hope for my soul, no matter what life hurled at me. I constantly remind myself that my life didn't get too complicated, messed up, dirty, emotional, or ugly for God. He has not and will not throw in the towel. Even when I am in full-blown despair, He remains. If I cannot move, He sits with me until I can move again. He will not leave me. I'm pretty sure that when Rahab took time to look back after the battle, she thought a lot about that scarlet thread dangling out her window. Would it be enough? Would they see it? Would they remember? It was indeed enough. And the scarlet threads of grace that God has interwoven into our lives is still enough to carry us through today's battle. To take us back.
Amen.
That's a lot.
That was good. I don't know who wrote that, but that was good.
That was a lot of just you just praying and crying out, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've learned quickly to express my anger to God. I remember one time standing in Chris's room, it would have been probably about the time I wrote that, or maybe even probably a few years before I wrote that one. And I was just like, God, I can't handle anything else. And as plain as day, I heard, for what? And I was like, well, it just shook me for a second, because I was like, well, or I guess I'll just trust you anyway. I really don't know what else to do, So, but yeah, when I brought him home, I was terrified. And yet, I have to look back, and now it's been 15 years. Actually, July 1st is the day I brought him home. 14 years, I guess it's been 14 years ago since I brought him home on July 1st. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was terrified. I got sick every time I had to transfer him, because, from a chair to the bed or wherever, back and forth. And now I just toss him wherever I want him. I'm like, come on now, you're going to go over here, you're going to go over there. And, but I was just terrified. And yet I knew that God's grace, by that time I was like, God's grace, just looking back and realizing when I wrote that post, God's carried me to this point. He didn't abandon me. Even when I got mad at him and said, why did you let this happen? I know enough to know God didn't do it, right? But I know also that it did cross his desk and he didn't stop it. And I dealt with a lot of anger over that early on, but I learned to just express that to God. And he is a big God. He's a big God, and his shoulders are big, and he can carry whatever I've got on my heart today. And I have learned to just take it to him. It doesn't matter how big it is, how ugly it is, and just the fact that sometimes I know God has just sat and let me blow off steam, and he waits until I get that all blown off. And then maybe he sends a phone call. Maybe it's just that comfort of the Holy Spirit, knowing he's just with me, knowing that he's dragging me today because I just can't take another step, right? And just that the communion that I've learned with God. I hesitate to say it's worth the journey, but I don't have a better word to say it. I don't want it to happen again ever to anybody else's son or my son, of course. But I have to say that in the middle of the fire, I found that fourth man walking there. He's right there. He didn't leave the 3 Hebrew children. He didn't leave Daniel. He sat there and closed the lion's mouth all night, but he didn't keep him from going into the lion's den. But he's there, and he's always there, and he's always enough. And sometimes I have to look back and just say, I just can't believe we've scaled this mountain, or I can't believe I fell in that pit, or I can't believe you dug me out of that muddy pit. There's all these so many different analogies we could use to our day-to-day lives, and the living grief of losing someone without losing their actual body is really not talked about enough in some Christian circles because we're kind of not allowed to grieve. So I had to learn that grief is okay. I was trying to stuff it inside, and I began to realize, you know what? God doesn't say, bring me all of you except I don't want to see when you cry. Or I don't want to see when, you're really hurting so badly you don't have the words for it. Just when you work through that, work through those emotions, then come back and we'll talk. No, he's there in those moments too. Nothing is too dirty for him to roll up his sleeves and get in there and go, come on, let me help you get out of this. Now the catch is, I have to let him. I have to, he's always right there, but sometimes we're trying to dig our own way out, or we're trying to fight our own way out, and we forget that he's there to help us through those things, and we hide the grief because we think it's unacceptable. We hide the grief, we hide the tears, or we refuse to cry. That's what I used to do. But now, when something comes, because I still have grief, I some days I have to stay off of Facebook because I'll see all the things his friends are doing. His friends are having kids and get married and get divorced and get married again, whatever they're doing. And I see those things now. I think, where would Chris have been? Would he have married his girlfriend? Would he have married this lady? Or would he have married somebody else? Would he have had kids? Would he have been divorced? What would he be doing? And sometimes that grief is too much. But I learned to cry it out, express it to God, and just walk away and just have to be okay with it, and just let God have all of those things, because he's the only one that can really help me with that.
Now, you have Facebook pages. One of them is daily devotions for caregivers.
That's a blog.
That's a blog, and one of them is Keeping Up with Chris Hampton.
Yes, that's a group on Facebook now.
You also have your own publications, Dove's Fire Ministries. You have written Bible study guides, devotionals. You have your own YouTube channel called Peace Out with Jeanie Olinger. Take a moment and share with us what Chris wasn't able to do, but he's now able to do.
He's kind of ornery now. When I first brought him home, and that's when I really started the blog itself, because I realized there wasn't a lot of faith-filled materials that also let you grieve, that recognize the hurt. So I started the daily devotionals for caregivers. I probably should have called it Whenever I Feel Like It, Devotionals for Caregivers, because I don't always do it daily, but I did it first. And my whole thing was to help those of us who were grieving and realize that's not a sin, just take it back to God, and God's there for us. And so I started that then. But when I first brought him home, he did nothing. He slept 23 hours a day pretty much, and he was stiff as a board from head to toe. He had so much tone, he didn't move anything. He didn't move. He would wake up, but he had that, we call it the brain injury stare, where he looked off at, into space, and nobody's really home, but he's alive, and that was about it. And there were a few things he did early on, but then he kept getting sick. He just kept getting pneumonia, and so he just had so many setbacks. But now, as a matter of fact, today, I can get him to take about 4 steps by myself, working with his legs and things. He's starting to move his arms. He's awake all day long. I get him up and get him dressed early in the morning. He's up and down quite a bit, but he's up pretty much all day, every day, unless he's really in recovery mode. Sometimes he sleeps more, but he didn't do anything, nothing. He eats now. He's eating again now. and he's just making tons of progress. I got a little weight on him finally, and he will fight me sometimes, and he pulls away from me if he doesn't want me to tug on him this way or that way. I'm like, well, who do you think you are? You big man, just gonna be messing with me? I'm still the mama, you know. But he's much more engaged. He looks people in the eyes. He's very close to talking. He's not supposed to be making this much progress this far out from the wreck. Most doctors give you a year. Some generously will give you 3, wherever you are at that 3-year mark. But I have to say, we have way surpassed what anybody thought he was going to do at those marks. Because just the last 2 years, he has just made some remarkable progress. He's very vocal, even though he doesn't use words yet. He's very aware of his environment, much more aware of his environment. He'll turn and look when somebody walks in the door. He will scowl. He has all these new expressions. He smiles now. I'm waiting for that laugh. That's going to be a big one for me. I'm waiting for that laugh. I know he's going to laugh soon. He's got to. I'm too silly for him not to, right? So that's been a huge journey there to watch him just transition and kind of come out a little at a time, just regain. He's kind of in what we would call maybe recovery mode. He's just recovering movement. And the fact that he's moving his arms, that's just in the last few weeks that he started moving his arms, specifically his left one, because he had the brain injury caused him to actually ignore his right side. So even though it wasn't technically paralyzed, he just ignored it because it wasn't working right. So his brain said, let's just forget about that. We're not going to work about the right side, so let's just work on the left side. So he regained. He started moving his left side a lot faster than he started moving his right side. So we just worked with the left side. And now he's starting to move his right leg. He's kicking his foot. And he actually was keeping beat to the music the other day, literally on beat with the Eagles, who wouldn't keep beat with the Eagles, right? So he was keeping beat. And it's just been remarkable, especially the last couple of years. I've taken him to therapy in Fort Worth. I took him to therapy in Iowa. I have searched, and right at 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, I found a place literally 20 minutes from my house that is for people that's underinsured, and they've been working with him and just really pulling him out. And we are all, even today, she was here, and she was like, I just can't believe he's doing all of this. I'm like, I know, right? So he's come a long ways, and I learned early on I have to focus on how far he's come, not how far he has to go. Now, it doesn't mean I'm not setting goals. I'm not working towards things, but I have to really focus on how far he's come, how much he's doing, how much more he's doing than he was 15 and a half years ago, when, the wreck and all that. And that helps me keep a positive attitude and go, okay, if we came this far, we can take another step. We can go make more progress. Let's just keep going towards progress. So but you have to focus. And maybe we need to do that in our spiritual walk sometimes too, realize how far we came rather than how far we need to go, because we get discouraged if all we ever look at is how far we need to go. But we need to set those goals. We need to know where we're going. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but sometimes we got to take a good hard look and go, we've come a long way. God has brought, what's that old spiritual, God has brought me a mighty long way. And just realize how far God has brought us and know that he's going to be with us as we go ahead and continue to proceed forward.
Now, you have written a few books. There is a leadership book that has 1,800 copies that is now in leaders' hands that were Hindu that have now become believers. There's 18 copies of 1 John and James study guides. There is 31 days in Psalm 31. There's a book called Peace Out. Take a moment and share what you're doing now with these books being translated.
Yeah, that kind of was God's little surprise package for me. I knew early on I was a writer. I actually started writing the first book I wrote. Now, I did publish 2 poetry books way back in 1991. That's really where, and I would say Fire Ministries kind of started. And I self-published. I mean, literally had the computer and the printer on the freezer and printed it out front and back and bound it together. It was quite the operation, and nothing like the digital world we have today. And so I did have those 2, but then when we were in the nursing home there in Bernice, Louisiana, I was like, okay, I don't want to waste my time, and I began to study, and I started looking at James, and I started writing down my questions that I had, just the questions I had, and so I wrote the study guide to James literally in the nursing home there while I was living there with Chris early on after his wreck, that in the fall of 2009, I guess it would have been, or probably the summer of 2009, in the spring. And so I wrote that one. Then I wrote the First John study guide. Then I wrote the leadership manual I actually wrote it to do for a friend of mine who said, can you do a leadership thing for my church by way of Skype? And I said, yeah, I can. So I actually wrote it for her church. And then one day I was like, I've got a whole book here. Why don't I just write this? So I began to put it together in a book. And so I began. So I've got, I think at this point, 14 or 15 books that I've self-published. And of course, I'm working on another one. I just published Peace Out. But about a year ago, maybe not quite a year ago, I had a ministry contact me from Pakistan, and he just wanted me to teach at their school, New Life Institute. Can you teach by way of Zoom at our school? We're going to put it on YouTube. I said, sure. So we did a couple of lessons. Well, then he had done a little bit of research. He said, you wrote some books. I said, yeah. He goes, well, let's translate them into Urdu and give them to Pakistani Christians. And I was like, you can do that? You're not going to get killed or anything? You know? And he's like, no. And so I was like, okay. So we did the James and First John. We did those first. And then when he started translating the leadership book, he quit everything else. He goes, I like this one. So he worked literally day and night translating the leadership book. He said, this is the book we need to do. And I was like, okay. So we got it together. And that's one thing we both have to learn is I'm like, look, this is God's baby. I don't have no money. Okay. But as God sends the money in, I'm sending it straight to you for printing. So he sends me a bill, then I send that. So we have, at this point, printed 1,800 copies of the leadership book. And I think we've done 1,000 now of James and 800 of First John. And then the other ones, we've done about 500. I've got 2 waiting to be printed. And now he's already started translating Peace Out. So, but now those are on in Urdu. So we've translated that many. I don't know how many that is, probably 6 or 8. And so he would come back and go, the books are gone. They're begging for your book. I can't even go speak at a church because if I don't take that book with me, they're going to be mad at me. We've got to print more books. So we just kept printing, and that's how we got to about 1,800 is what was printed. And then my friend Javed, he lives on the other side of Pakistan, or on the northern part of Pakistan, and he works with pastors from India who have converted from Hinduism. And so he asked for 200 copies. So we got him 200 copies to give to those pastors. And in the leadership, because what they do is they train them once they are converted and all that, then they train them as leaders and train them in the Word, and then send them back to their tribes, their own tribes as pastors. And so I was like, wow, this got really big really fast. I wasn't expecting it. And so now we're talking about, we're going to begin, we're taking it a little bit slower than we did at first. Because I'm like, you got to slow down, dude. You got to slow down. And but we're going to go a little bit slower than we were at first. But he's translating into, I believe it's Sindhi, which is or Sindhu or Hindu, something like that. It's a language that is the second language of Pakistan, but it's more the language in India too. So we're talking about, we've already made the plans to begin translating it into that third language. And all of that I just said just completely still blows my mind. I just look at it and go, wow. Because that was my dream, was to go to the nation. But when Chris had his wreck, I was like, oh, great promise, God. Way to go. I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen now. I always said, God, you can do a miracle. I don't know how you're going to do it, or bring me lots and lots of help. But, I'm not going to let go of the vision that God gave me. And I started teaching English as a second language and ended up singing praise and worship in the public school in China. And one time I was like, I kept telling him, I only know Jesus music. I only know church music. They're like, no, please sing. I was like, okay, but here we go. So we sang, we bow down, and they're like, oh, if we're good next class, will you sing again? I'm like, sure. So I'm like getting paid to go by way of Skype and sing worship music in the public school in China on their Sunday mornings, my Saturday night. And so I realized that God had fulfilled the promise to me, but it didn't look anything like I thought it was going to. But he brought it, he surprised me with it. I was like, I just laid it on a shelf. Go to the nations, right? Why didn't you tell me this was coming? And I was like, I know God doesn't lie, but I don't know how he's going to get that out of this situation. And then one day I looked up and realized I'd been traveling the nations through the air by way of Skype and Zoom. And then when this thing in Pakistan happened, I was like, wow, God is blowing my mind, because I never saw this coming. This wasn't the picture I had. It wasn't the vision I had, but God knew. You know, he knew I wasn't going to have a passport or buy a plane ticket. Works for me. So it's been an amazing journey.
You also wrote Gifts of the Spirit study guide.
Yes.
That was your study in 1 Corinthians chapter 12.
Mostly 1 Corinthians, but I think there's some in Ephesians, mostly 1 Corinthians, and then I actually tie it in and go back and look at some Old Testament examples of what we would call, I know those gifts are given to the church, or the New Testament church, but they operated in, we know there was prophecy in the Old Testament, there was words of knowledge in the Old Testament, the same Holy Spirit that was in the Old Testament. They just had a different covenant, right, and different operations, of course. And so it's a primer. It's for somebody who just says, I want to learn a little bit more about the gifts of the Spirit. Where do I start? And it takes you through, and you look at the scripture and go, oh, that's what prophecy looks like. Oh, that's what the word of knowledge looks like. Oh, that's an example of the word of wisdom. So it kind of helps a whole lot, bring all an example of working of miracles. So it kind of looks at the scriptural maybe interpretation of those gifts, so that someone can kind of learn what those gifts are. It also takes the learner or student through, why do we even have them? Why would God send them? What role do they play in the church today? Are they still valid? Can I have a gift? Do I have a gift? So it kind of takes a real basic look, and that's why I called it a primer on the gifts of the Spirit. It's just kind of a basic look at the gifts of the Spirit.
I'm going to give you the final words. Talk to us about a funny story relating to your mom. Because I know your mom was your youth pastor, your Sunday school teacher, your pastor.
She was.
And take a moment and tell us a funny story with your mom. And how can we get our hands on some of these books? Where do we need to go to order some of these books?
All right. My mom was a minister. I grew up as a PK, so that explains a whole lot right there. I often say I was so religious that I went to church 9 months before I was ever born, because my mom was all in. She was all in, and she was at one time my pastor. I remember her being my Sunday school teacher, youth pastor. She was a load of fun, and I grew up listening to her preach. She was a minister. She played the piano. She was kind of like me. She didn't sing real good, but she sang with all her heart. So it was good. And she never met a stranger. I couldn't take her anywhere because she'd know everybody before we left. That person over there, you know what they did? She'd know what they went through and how. She'd already been praying for everybody and everything. She was just a real people person. And she was always all in for when it came to ministering to people. She didn't see race. She didn't see socioeconomic standing. She just said, these are people. And actually, she became a nurse and worked in the medical field for most of her years were spent taking care of people. And she loved being a nurse because then she always had the open door to pray. If that door was open, she was always offering to pray for them. And so she loved it, and she could tell funny stories and all this. So when you mentioned something about a funny story, I could tell a lot of them because she was a character. And that's where I got some of mine, right? But she was such a character. But the first thing that came to mind was this funeral we went to, two funerals. Actually, one funeral we went to, we got tickled, and I was like, I'm not sitting by you by any more funerals, because we just sit there and giggled because they were putting people in the choir, and you could see the sign language. They'd go, no, you could tell them, shake their head, no, we're not supposed to be singing. They were like, yeah, it's overflow. But the other funeral, the main thing that came to mind was we had somebody had passed our church. And my mom loved chocolate. She ate chocolate, everything. If you got dessert, it was chocolate. My daddy would say, can you make something that's not chocolate? She's like, well, yeah, but why? It was chocolate. She made chocolate bread pudding, which was nasty. She made chocolate pies. She made chocolate cookies. But she had this specialty, and I've got her handwritten recipe of her chocolate oatmeal cake. Man, that is the best cake in the world. I may have to go make one after we talk here. But the icing is ugly. It's got it's butter and powdered sugar, and it's kind of we would probably call it a glaze. But if you don't cook the chocolate cake perfect, the middle all falls in, and it literally looks like somebody stepped in it. So she made a chocolate oat milk cake because that was her favorite. She was going to a funeral. Back then, and I guess still today, the churches feed the family, right? So she made that chocolate oat milk cake, and when she got there, she realized the whole middle had just caved in. It looked like somebody had stepped in it. So she just tossed it over there, and she thought, well, if nobody eats it, I'll just take it home and eat it. No problem, right? She likes chocolate oat milk cake. So she set it on the table, and then somebody walked up, and they were looking at the desserts, and so she started saying, look at that. Isn't that horrible? Can you believe somebody brought something that looked like that to a funeral dinner? And they'd go, oh, that is horrible. She's like, I know, it's terrible, ain't it? And they'd go off, and she was just giggling. The next person would come, she'd go, look at that, isn't that a horrible, that cake just looks horrible. Can you believe somebody would actually bring that to a funeral to feed the family? And she sat there and made fun of herself all afternoon with nobody knowing she was the one who had brought the ugly cake to the funeral dinner. That was the kind of person, though, she was. She would just jump in there and just make a joke out of anything, just about anything. I don't know anybody who laughs so hard. As a matter of fact, the last conversation I had with her, she didn't even know who I was, and it was during the pandemic, and so I'd called her on the nursing home there, was using Skype, and so I could call and talk to her. She was eating chocolate cake all propped up in her recliner, and I said, is that good? She's like, yep. And I'm like, well, are you enjoying it? She's like, yep, I am. I said, do you like that chocolate cake better than you like me? And she said, yep, I do. And then she just laughed and laughed and laughed. So she loved her chocolate cake. But she was happy. She didn't know anybody, but she was so happy even until the day she passed. She was just chuckling and laughing, and everything was grand. She had no idea that she didn't know anybody. She just knew that life was grand and chocolate was grander. So she loved her chocolate. So she was quite a character. If somebody wants to order my books, there's 2 different places right now that they are available. I have my own website, which is Fire Ministries Publications.com, and those are all ebooks, but they're printable, so you can download them onto your tablet, your iPad, your phone. You can use them on your phone, but you can print them, and then you can use them for a group Bible study if you want, or you can use it, and then you can print it again. If you didn't like it, you can print it again and go through it again if you want. On Amazon, I have a bookshelf with most of my books on there. Several books are on there. Not all. I have more on my website on ebook form than I do on Amazon, I think. But on Amazon, they are available on Kindle, and on most of them, if they're big enough, are available in print. Especially the Leadership, the Bible Study Guide. They are available in print. Peace Out is 31 Days in Psalm 31. That's been a big one. That one and Affirmations for Caregivers have been, those 2 in the Leadership book have been kind of my, if I have a bestseller, those would be it. So you can type in, probably the title of the book is easier. If you type in my name, you don't always get something, but you can find it. If you hook up with me on either YouTube or Facebook, the link is there that will take you directly to the Amazon site, because, they got a weird URL. It's not just, it is my name there, but usually if I'm on an odd computer, I'll type in 31 days in Psalm 31, and it usually comes right up, because that's kind of a different title that's not really out there. But you can use my name, and that's Jeanie with 1 N. Don't waste any ink writing those 2 N's in Jeanie, right? So that's where those are available. And then if you want to read the blog, it is dailydevotionsforcaregivers.com, and I think that's most of where everything is.